Wow. What a great turnout. Thanks everyone for coming. We're so glad that you could be with us today for the second session in our 5-session series on how to educate character in the university. I'm Jennifer Rothschild, and I'll be your host for today. I'll introduce our speaker in a moment, following a couple of announcements. So I wanted to let you know that our 3rd, 4th, and 5th sessions in this series are now posted on our Educating Character Initiative website on the events page. We have some really exciting topics and speakers lined up, so please take a look. We hope you can join us for those. We'll post a link to that page in the chat. On that same page, our events page, you'll find recordings of our previous sessions. If you missed those, we had a really great session last month on how to build capacity to educate character. That video is available there if you'd like to watch it, and future recordings will be available there as well. I would also like to remind you, if you have not done so already, to please register for the Educating Character Initiative community. We'll also post a link to the registration in the chat. We'd love to hear about your expertise and learn from what you do, connect you with like-minded others, and invite you to all of the ECI events and opportunities that are coming up. Speaking of events and opportunities, I want to tell you about a couple of things that we're going to be announcing in the coming week or so. We're going to be circulating 2 calls. One is a call for applicants to a faculty course development workshop. It's going to be on integrating character into your existing and new syllabuses. We're really excited about that course. And then also we're going to be sending around a call for papers for a major conference. It's going to be held in the first week of December of 2024. We couldn't be more excited about the topic, which is educating character across differences. Very timely and important, and we look forward to all your submissions for the excellent papers that you'll present there. Okay, on to today's business. Our format for this session will be as follows. I'm going to turn it over to our speaker for a presentation, after which we'll have time for Q&A. Because we're a big group, we're going to run questions through the chat. So please, if you have a question, post it there. You may do this at any time during the presentation or after it. Okay, I could not be more pleased to bring to you our speaker for today. He's someone who's thought a great deal about how to educate character in the university, and he's here to give us some tools for doing this work, tools that he uses himself in his teaching, and tools that are incredibly adaptable to any university space. Michael Lamb is the F.M. Kirby Foundation Chair of Leadership and Character, the Executive Director of the Program for Leadership and Character at Wake Forest University, and Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Humanities. He's also an Associate Fellow at the Oxford Character Project, the author of 3 books, A Commonwealth of Hope, Augustine's Political Thought, and co-editor of Cultivating Virtue in the University and Everyday Ethics, Moral Theology and the Practices of Ordinary Life. Here to talk about the 7 strategies for cultivating virtue in the university, my colleague and friend, Michael Lamb. Take it away, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, so much for that kind introduction. It's great to see so many people here on this call. I'm looking forward to today's conversation about 7 strategies to educate character in the university. So I look forward to your comments, questions, ideas, ways you might be doing this in your own context. So we'll get started. The real aim of the ECI, the Educating Character Initiative, is to help equip faculty and staff in different institutions to think about how we might do this in our own ways, in our own context. So I'll share some ideas from work at Wake Forest, but also know that you have things you'll be doing in your own ways, in your own context. It might also illuminate our work here. So we're very excited to learn from you and think about ways we can do this work even better wherever we are. So there is a great challenge we face right now. There's a need for character in our culture to restore trust, to build community across differences, and to help our students flourish amidst increasing ethical, social, political, cultural complexity. And so this has been a very evident need, and we've also seen that many institutions and many faculty actually want to address this need in some way. In the most recent survey done by the Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA, 85% of faculty at over 140 institutions believe it's part of their role to develop students' moral character. not just intellectual character, but moral character. So that's a very significant number of faculty. But many faculty don't know how to do this in ways that might be most effective. They're often not taught to educate character in graduate school, and many who want to do this work simply don't know how to do it in ways based on the best research. So our hope in the Educating Character Initiative, and this talk in particular, is to help equip those who want to do this work with the strategies and tools to do it well and wisely in their own context. So that's the hope for today's seminar. I have two main questions that we'll be asking today. First is, for those of you new to character, what is character? How do we understand it? And how does that conception help us think about how we might teach or educate character in the classroom and beyond? And then secondly, how is character developed? And what can we learn from research in various fields about ways we can educate character both effectively and with innovation and integrity? So we'll start first with what is character. Our view of character at Wake Forest is very, very basic. It's the collection of stable, deep, and enduring dispositions or habits that define who we are and shape how we characteristically think, feel, and act across time and across circumstances. So these are the qualities of traits we might think about when we think about who we are morally or intellectually. We might think about who our best friend is. How we would describe that person often reflects character in some way. So character is a holistic concept that involves kind of ethical perception, how we see the world, deliberation and decision making about how we think in relation to what we see and perceive, the regulation of emotions to help us respond well to what we see and think, and then finally action that comes out of our thinking and seeing in ways that responds to particular moments or needs as they arise. So character, as we understand at Wake Forest, is pretty expansive. We want to have a very capacious view of what this means for our faculty, staff, and students, and also expect you all might have also different approaches to character. So I thought I'd share ours at Wake Forest to give you a sense of what we think about when we think about how we approach character here. First, it's focused on flourishing. We really believe that good character supports flourishing individuals and communities. We believe these two are related. The individuals cannot flourish without communities flourishing, and vice versa. So our work at Wake Forest is very community-oriented. We believe it's really important for us that character is not seen in individualistic terms or in isolation from other contexts, but actually is part of what it means to be in a community and be informed by the pursuit of the common good. So the community really orients and informs how we think about what character is aiming toward. Relatedly, we believe character is culturally and contextually sensitive, that it really requires us understanding how character is developed and exercised might depend on different contexts, backgrounds, and situations. It might look differently depending on one's own context. We want to be open to the different ways that character can be expressed and exercised given those differences of circumstance and situation. We also, therefore, want to make sure we are inclusive in how we think about what character is. We welcome perspectives from different cultures, traditions, and backgrounds in ways that help students clarify and strengthen their own values and virtues. I think having that inclusive approach is really important for us to welcome students from different traditions, different cultures, backgrounds into this conversation, help them understand their own views, but also to learn from others who might be different in their approach to ethics and character. We also believe it's important to recognize that character is always being formed. It's developmental. We're always being shaped by our context, and therefore we're always in the process of being developed, either positively or negatively. And also that means we can also intentionally cultivate character in ways that are effective. But we must be aware that it also can be corrupted if we're not careful how we're being developed over time. Then finally, we believe that we can also gain a lot of insight from different disciplines and perspectives across professions and fields. So our approach here is very much rooted in interdisciplinary engagement, where we draw on research from philosophy, psychology, education, humanities, social sciences, and other fields to really inform our approach to make it most effective and also most inclusive. So we understand character to have two main kinds of character, two traits of character, and we call these virtues and vices. So virtues are just good habits that are supposed to think, feel, and act at the right times, about the right things, toward the right people, for the right end, in the right way, as an ancient philosopher once said. And vices are those bad habits that are supposed to think, feel, and act at the wrong times, for the wrong reasons, in the wrong way, and toward the wrong ends. So you see the differences in how they might be oriented. But right and wrong here is always understood contextually. Virtue as an approach is really a context-sensitive approach, which helps us think about the ways that different circumstances require different responses. And so virtues really help us think about what's proper or fitting in different contexts. So I want to dig down a little bit deeper into what a virtue is, so we can think about how it might affect how we teach or educate that virtue among our students. So first, a virtue is a stable, reliable, and enduring habit, which means that a single act or a fleeting feeling is not enough to have a virtue. We can't just be honest at work, for example, and not honest at home, and therefore have the trait of honesty. We need to be honest across domains. We also can't just be honest once and then expect that we are honest people. We have to be honest across time in ways that show us we have a pattern of thought and belief and action that suggests a virtue as a part of our character. That's one key feature. Secondly, that virtue is acquired over time. That makes it different from a natural personality trait, which might inherit or be born with in some way. Virtue actually has to be acquired with intentional practice and formation over months and years. And so it makes it more of an intentional practice approach to this important quality. It's also, though, despite being a habit, not a mindless habit. It's an intelligent habit, to use the word of Julia Annis, a philosopher. It means it responds to reasons in ways that are rational, can be understood and intelligible to different people in different contexts. So it is informed by rational thought, even if not always conscious in how we act out of those habits. And unlike other things that might involve habits, like skills, virtues are always ordered toward morally good or intellectually good ends. So there's an aim of virtues that is morally or intellectually good. And we can use skills for good or bad purposes. Virtues are always ordered toward morally good ends and aims. But they can be also threatened by various vices, temptations, and obstacles, right? We're not always permanently virtuous. We have to also keep sustaining our virtue and developing it over time. Otherwise, we might actually fall or diminish our character in various ways. So being alert to temptations is very helpful for students to understand the ways in which they can fall away from virtue or be diminished in certain ways of expressing their character. So to avoid that kind of diminishment, we also need other virtues. There's a great idea from ancient philosophy about how the virtues are all interconnected. We need various virtues to support each other. So, for example, we might have the virtue of justice, but if we lack courage to do justice when it's really difficult, we won't be fully just. Or we might actually have the virtue of courage, but if we lack wisdom about how to apply that virtue in the face of fear, we might actually rush into a situation that actually seems reckless, not courageous. So we need various virtues to support each other in responding to these temptations and difficult situations. So that's a picture of virtue as a whole. So there are various kinds of virtues. You may have seen long lists of virtues as you think about these ideas. We think about these in two main categories. Intellectual virtues, those help us be excellent thinkers. They perfect our capacities for thought in various ways. So from wisdom to creativity or curiosity, those are virtues that help us think well, to help us flourish in how we think. Moral virtues are those that help us either relate to others in ways that help them and ourselves flourish, or to control and regulate our own emotions to ensure we're responding well to the world that we encounter. So virtues like justice or compassion are focused on other relationships, while virtues like courage or patience are focused on our own internal dispositions to help regulate the emotions or desires that might cause us to act out of character in some way. Of course, any of these virtues could be applied in different domains. So you might have civic virtues that might relate to justice or courage, or professional virtues in different contexts that might call out some of these virtues more than others. So that's just two main categories. Many virtues, as the ancient philosophers argue, often are means between two vices, a vice of deficiency and a vice of excess. So think about courage again. Courage is the virtue that helps avoid the vice of deficiency, the lack of courage, which is cowardice, but also avoids the excess of confidence, which is rashness or recklessness. To be reckless or rash is not to be virtuous, but to exceed the bounds of what virtue might require. So there are different virtues in how we think about the vices, but helping students recognize that virtues are always connected to and perhaps sort of corresponding to vices helps us recognize that we have to be alert to temptations and obstacles that might appear in our pursuit of good character. So that's our basic view of what character is. I'm happy to answer questions about that in the Q&A. But we'll now turn to how character might be developed intentionally, and to draw on 7 strategies that my colleagues at Oxford and I have developed based on research across various fields. We were doing this work back in 2014 to understand how to really develop character and leadership among postgraduate or graduate students in Oxford, and found that there are many different scholars doing work in different fields, from psychology to philosophy to education, but often these strategies were quite diffuse and never really gathered together in one place. And so we spent some time actually putting them together in one place, doing the research to back them up, and giving examples of how those strategies might be applied in a course for university students. And we have a chapter in this book, Cultivating Virtue in University, that has those 7 strategies and the research that supports them. So I'll share more about that in today's presentation. But a bit of background about the actual origins. These do come out of actual programs to shape character, beginning at Oxford in 2014 with various leadership and character programs there. We've also applied these at Wake Forest in both our undergraduate college and professional schools, and work with partners across the world to do this in different contexts in their own universities, from Hong Kong to London and Madrid. So we see this in different ways being applied in different contexts. In fact, those folks at Madrid actually put our strategies into Spanish to make them accessible to people speaking Spanish. So there are ways in which it's really kind of being used across the world. We hope to learn from that application as we develop this program further. They've also been shown to be effective. We've done several articles ourselves at Wake Forest and Oxford to show that these strategies, when applied intentionally, can actually help shape students' character in both curricular and co-curricular context. And those also been applied beyond just Wake Forest and Oxford in other contexts as well. So we hope to do more research in the coming years to see how these strategies might be most impactful for our students. Okay, so let's get down to the strategies themselves. So the first strategy is habituation through practice. We become what we repeatedly do or practice. This is a very ancient idea. In fact, it comes from Aristotle and others. He says, for example, we become builders, for instance, by building. We become harpists by playing the harp. Similarly, then, we become just by doing just actions, temperate by doing temperate actions, brave by doing brave actions. So we cultivate character like we cultivate skills, by doing them over and over again until they become second nature, part of our sort of automatic way of being in the world. So it's what Julia Ennis calls the skill analogy, because we do acquire character as we acquire skill through lots of practice. This also fits with research in psychology on goal-dependent automaticity, that we seek goals in reliable ways. We become more automatic in pursuing certain behaviors that might achieve those goals. And it fits ideas from ancient traditions on the importance of ritual and practice, from Buddhism and Confucianism to Judaism, Islam, and other traditions. So these are often very different ways to understand habituation. And so there are different ways we can learn from these different traditions, but they all emphasize the importance of human beings being part of rituals and practices that shape their thoughts, feelings, and actions towards certain ends in ways that become expressive of good character. So it's very important in that context there. And there's a lot of research done recently in contemporary psychology and in sort of popular thought about how habit formation might actually shape our actions. You may have read the work Atomic Habits by James Clear or The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. There are other books by Wendy Wood, for example, that really elevate the research on the science of habit formation to inform our work. We also can apply that same science to the habits of good character. So given that, how can we apply this research in ways that might help us shape the character of students? I'm going to give some examples now of this strategy in practice. So first, we can have students do readings about habituation, either excerpts from Aristotle or Confucius, or perhaps from James Clear or Wendy Wood about habituation, depending on the context of our course. We have them think about how they can repeat practices throughout their time in a course. For example, doing reflection exercises every week to habituate reflection on experience as one other way of habituating a certain strategy. One effective way is by having students keep a gratitude journal, which research in psychology has shown to be very effective for increasing the virtue of gratitude, but also for increasing resilience, hope, and overall well-being. So there's a lot of research showing that gratitude journals done regularly can actually foster virtues in real ways. So we've actually applied that insight to help students think about other virtues they might want to cultivate through a journal. So in the class I teach, some students actually choose to keep an honesty journal or a courage journal to think about how they're actually demonstrating courage or cowardice, for example, in different contexts, to understand which situational variables might influence their decision in that context, and how they can be stronger in being more honest and courageous throughout the week. So you can apply this in different contexts as well. We also might emulate Benjamin Franklin and his autobiography. He had a plan to grow more morally perfect, as he said, and he had 13 virtues, one per week, that he tried to habituate over time. He kept a chart to see how he did each day on those virtues. And so we can think about ways we have self-accountability to encourage habituation in different virtues and practices. So that's the first method. Second, we have reflection on experience. To prevent habituation from being mindless, we must reflect on the experiences we have of growing in our character, or perhaps falling away from the character that we have. And so this has been very important across different traditions, but you see a great quote here from Mandela, talking about the importance of developing internal factors of character. He says here, honesty, sincerity, simplicity, humility, pure generosity, absence of vanity, readiness to serve others. Development in matters of this nature is inconceivable without serious introspection, without knowing yourself, your weaknesses, and mistakes. So that kind of reflection about who we are, about how we've made mistakes in the past, how we can grow in the future, is very important for developing the kind of reflective capacity that really shapes our ability to respond to our experiences in ways that can be constructive and therefore help promote character development. So he says, especially for the virtue of practical wisdom, which is kind of a central virtue in the tradition of character that we all use here. We often learn wisdom not by reading a book or by hearing a lecture. Even this one, we learn wisdom by learning from experiences, our own experiences about ways in which we've learned how to think about our life and respond to different circumstances. Research shows in psychology that this dimension of wisdom, the reflective dimension, is very important for holistic views of wisdom. And we also see this in different journals that have focused on reflective practice, that be it nursing, medicine, law, or education, having reflective practice to really think about how you're acting in certain contexts and learning from that is a very important way to grow as a professional in different fields. It really shows the kind of wisdom that character relies on. So you can do reflection in many different ways. Here's just a few examples that we use at Wake Forest. First, we often have our students in the very first week or two of class do a character autobiography to understand how they've been shaped so far. No one's a blank slate. What has influenced them? How have they engaged exemplars or communities in their past? And what have those communities offered to them in their own character growth? It's a very helpful way to kind of situate their own narrative and help them think about how they want to continue that narrative once they move forward in college. We also assign journal entries with very well-crafted prompts on each virtue we study throughout the course. So here's one, for example, on resilience, and ask students to demonstrate a time when they've had resilience in the face of failure or adversity and what they learned in that process. You can find ways to create prompts that engage the readings, but then turn it to personal experience in ways that help students connect the material they're studying with their own experience and help them see their own experience as one valid source of knowledge and wisdom. That's a very important part of shifting their views of what it counts to be being educated, not just being educated through books or professors, but through their own experience throughout life. We also use songs, poems, art to offer more creative ways to engage reflection or to encourage them to have conversations with friends and family about how they think about important topics of virtue and character. And one very important way we do this is through essays at the end of the class or the course that help students think about how they might integrate their lessons across the whole 15 weeks. This kind of integrative reflection helps to kind of solidify some of the insights from the course and give a touch point when they come back to the course to think about what they actually learned over those 15 weeks. So those are really great ways to integrate some of the lessons rather than having them be scattered throughout the semester. So number 3, we can learn not only from our own experiences, but from those who actually might embody virtue and character, our exemplars or role models, those we want to emulate because we admire their virtues and their skills. So exemplars have been shown across various fields to supply a model to emulate for us, to provide elevation or inspiration to be better. In fact, MRIs actually show that when we see an exemplar, our brain lights up in ways that want to inspire us to be better in our motivation. They can offer guidance or advice to us, help us make decisions about how to act, either by giving advice or actually helping us imagine what they would do in a certain situation. They can remind us of how to live a good life, and of course, they can expand our moral imagination about what certain virtues might require in certain contexts. So there's even been whole theories now developed about the importance of exemplars. One by Linda Zagzebski here called exemplarist moral theory that's very, very prominent in the last few years. It's shaping the ways that philosophers think about what exemplars might do to guide and sort of influence the moral life. There's also been a lot of research in psychology showing which exemplars are most effective, and a very influential article by Hahn and others in 2017 about the fact that relevant and attainable exemplars, not those moral heroes per se, but those in our own lives who might be just ahead of us or be like us in some way, can actually offer very helpful and motivating examples for us to follow and learn from. So those relevant and attainable exemplars are especially important for integrating into our curriculum and programming. There are various ways to think about exemplars in a course. I'll just mention a few here. You could have students read biographies or autobiographies about important exemplars from our history, that people who they want to study and learn from for their exemplary character. You might have them watch films or documentaries about similar figures. In my class, I have students watch this great documentary called Philosopher Kings about custodians at American universities who are real exemplars of wisdom, resilience, and courage. And it shows the ways in which students can learn, not just from their teachers, but from those in their residence halls and around their campus. We also have them watch films like Black Panther or Just Mercy to think about ways that both fiction and real life can shape our vision of justice and leadership. You might use portrait art. We have a great session in Oxford, the Oxford Character Project, called Portraits of Leadership, where we go to the National Portrait Gallery in London. And you can see a picture here of looking at a portrait and how artists think about different exemplars and how the art itself helps communicate their character in ways that are really fascinating and often revealing of someone's key virtues. We've done this also at Wake Forest with our Reynolda House Museum here in a Dorothea Lange exhibit. You might do this in your own context, in your own museum, or perhaps even showing art in class can be a great way to help students think about the way that art might portray and convey character. Of course, novels and music are a great way to do this. I start every class at Wake Forest with a song that might be relevant to that virtue of the day and help students see that these ideas are not just academic sort of concepts, but actual artifacts that we can see in our culture every day. So it makes it relatable in some way to hear music or to read novels that might engage character. You also can have students listen to TED Talks, for example, or other lectures. We found especially important when speakers come to campus to have more personal conversations that get beyond just the abstract and get into the more personal parts of their own journey. Hearing actual narratives, including narratives of failures and mistakes, can be quite helpful for making very prominent speakers relatable and attainable to these admiring students. You also might have your students interview their role model or exemplar and ask about their character. In my class, I have an assignment called a profile in character, where students spend an hour interviewing one of their own exemplars and then writing a profile of that person's character, what inspired them, how they developed that virtue or trait, and what the influence has meant for the student itself. And there have been very powerful ways not only to capture an influence of an exemplar, but also to create a stronger bond between the exemplar and the student that goes even beyond the class. So it's been a very fruitful assignment in past courses. You also might have your students write a letter of gratitude to an exemplar to tell them how much they meant to them, how much they were shaped by their own character. Those can often be very effective at creating a connection between exemplars and students, and also really fostering gratitude, not only in the student, but also in those who receive these letters. There's great studies showing that gratitude videos can actually boost gratitude for both parties in this case. Of course, we also are always exemplars, whether we realize it or not, in the classroom. How we treat each other, how we treat our students models for us certain kinds of character. So being thoughtful about how we model character can be a very important way for us to use exemplars to shape character in our classrooms. Great. So number 4 is virtue literacy, or learning about what virtues are and how we understand the concepts and the possibilities of concepts make possible for us. So knowing a certain language of virtue and knowing what virtues are and what they're not can be very helpful for us in examining our context, but also responding in ways that might elicit and express that virtue. So, for example, we might have discussions of particular virtues, understanding what the definition of that virtue is, how it might differ from various vices or semblances of virtue, those things that might look like virtue but not be. So, for example, I study hope as a virtue, and optimism is one prominent semblance of hope. It's not the virtue, but it's like the virtue. How does understanding that difference help us respond with hope, perhaps, but not optimism in certain contexts? You might also consider different obstacles to virtues and ways that virtues are often interconnected with each other. So those are ways to talk about virtues to help us apply that framework in ways that can help us respond better. I often say to my students that vision is a precondition for virtue. If we can't actually see the world clearly with concepts to describe it, we can't respond with the virtue we need to share. You also might have a virtue literacy quiz that helps them sort of memorize and internalize these concepts, or to use art, music, or films, or even memes to help students engage creatively with these ideas. So in my class, I have students create a meme of virtues. Here you see one of Drake, thinking about what the virtue of courage might be. So these are ways for students to apply their own creative energies in their own context to help sort of understand and express these concepts. You also have students read books about particular virtues to help them deepen their literacy. So here are a few books that are prominent examples of one virtue, from Angela Duckworth's Grit to Christian Miller's recent book on honesty. So having them read books or articles about virtue is really helpful. And one great source of those is the Greater Good Science Center. They have lots of articles that are pretty short and accessible that draw on sort of science character and virtue ethics and psychology to think about ways that certain virtues might be understood and even developed in the classroom. So I encourage you to check out their website for really good sort of articles on different virtues. Fifth, we can learn about virtue by being aware of our own biases and tendencies. We've all learned the last few years the ways that different biases and systems and structures often shape us unconsciously. And gaining more knowledge of that influence can help us become more alert to those biases and begin to counteract or correct them in very important ways, to break patterns that might actually lead us into unvirtuous or vicious behavior. So one way to do that is what Christian Miller calls getting out the word about these biases, to read about them, to understand them, talk about them in ways to help us recognize our own. So his book, The Character Gap, does this for various situational biases. And of course, we've read about the way that race or ethnicity or gender might bias us in certain context. With my students, I actually have them take a test through Project Implicit at Harvard, which gives a set of tests you can take to understand your own biases. And I have students take that test and then think about how that test might reflect their own automatic thoughts and what they can learn about how to sort of resist or shift out of those biased behaviors and thoughts. So there are ways to help do this that are quite constructive for how we understand ourselves. We also, if we know what we're biased toward or tempted toward, we can also choose situations that help us avoid those temptation or biases. So, for example, you see an image here of Odysseus on the way back home, tying himself to the mast to avoid the temptations of sirens that might lure him away from his destination at home. And his sailors, of course, put wax in their ears to avoid that temptation altogether. So you might think that screen monitoring apps might help us resist the sirens of technology in our very digitally connected world, right? How do we think about these different pre-commitments that we make before going into some situation to avoid acting in ways that might make us regret it later? So I use blind grading, for example, in my class, where I have students submit their papers with their student ID number, not their names. So I can make sure I'm grading fairly, not based on any biases I might have or be unconscious of. So there are ways we can also do it in our teaching and research to avoid these situations as well. If you know your biases, you also can figure out ways to rehearse your responses in cases where you might be tempted or pushed to act in certain ways. This is a very prominent idea behind Mary Gentile's influential book, Giving Voice to Values, where she suggests having rehearsals. Think about ways you might respond in various role play situations, so you can actually practice your response when you know you might be overwhelmed by a certain emotion or response in the moment. This has also been applied in various movements. So you see here a picture from the Civil Rights Movement, where nonviolent activists were actually practicing what it's like to have smoke blown on them or be insulted. And that those acting techniques, rehearsal, help them to actually stay calm and self-control when they might be tempted to be violent by harassing sort of citizens in the movement. So there are ways for us to practice our responses to be able to sort of really inhabit the virtues we want to inhabit in very stressful or pressurized moments. Number 6, moral reminders. Those reminders that help us recall our core commitments and activate our agency to choose to act virtuously, especially in times when we might be tempted otherwise. So these reminders help make our commitment salient to us in some way. They help remind us who we are and what we committed to, and create barriers, therefore, to rationalizing our behavior or justifying it based on the moment. Right. So one example is what are called my intent bracelets. You can have a word inscribed on a bracelet to remind you to be grateful, for example, or to seek out your purpose. These were very popular a few years ago when Beyonce and Kanye West had very prominent images with their My Intent bracelets on major media. Others have used them actually to think about the kind of virtue they want to habituate over time. You might also think about ways you might incorporate reminders throughout your class. One advantage of doing a class over 15 or 16 weeks compared to a one-day seminar or a weekend retreat is that you can actually remind students of virtues across the whole semester. And that repetition helps to kind of reinforce the importance of character as an aim for their life and their education. You might also emphasize the honor code. Many universities have honor codes that aren't only rules of behavior, but also reminders. When you write your name on a test or you pledge an honor code on an exam, you're actually trying to be someone of integrity and honesty in that context. Those are reminders to help call out your good character. And research shows actually they're actually effective. Those who actually have honor codes often see reduced amounts of cheating on their campuses. You have students memorize poems or maxims or quotes that might be relevant. You can have them put reminders on their phone to be grateful today or to think about empathy in some way, as students often do in my class. A great reminder is to have students write a letter to themselves about who they want to be a year from now, and have them actually write that letter and send it to themselves, or have it scheduled an email to come by email a year later. It's a great reminder to call attention to what they were, and who they wanted to become when they wrote that letter originally. It helps kind of give some self-accountability to our own pursuit of character and growth. Or you might eat Doritos, as this shows here. I was really encouraged to see a packet of Doritos that said on it, be kind today and stand up for someone. You can see it in the right-hand corner there. Even Doritos is trying to encourage you to use more reminders to be a person of good character. So you never know where you might see these things in your daily life. Then finally, and perhaps most importantly, we often develop character through our friendships. Our friends help us become our best selves and really call out who we ought to be. There are various kinds of friendship. Aristotle talks about 3 kinds of friendship: friendships of pleasure, utility, and virtue. And he thinks that the virtue friendships are the highest and most enduring because they're not just about things that benefit us, but about the good we share with and for our friends. So it's that kind of mutual goodwill and wishing the others good that really characterizes those friends of virtue. And therefore, these friends actually often provide the context to practice virtues like benevolence or empathy or compassion, or even gratitude, to reflect on our experiences in conversation or on our own, to emulate their example. I often have great friends who are exemplars to me in important ways. To talk about character and virtue, to think about how our own biases might actually inform who we are. And then also to give us support and accountability when we perhaps go wrong. That's especially important, I think, for this generation, who often sees accountability not as an expression of friendship, but as a threat to friendship. How do we help students see that true accountability, truth-telling can actually be a helpful expression of what true virtuous friendship might look like? So to help students think about these questions, we have them do readings about friendships of virtue, from Clementine Churchill to poems by Uriah Mountain Dreamer, which have been great ways to help show different exemplars who express both support and accountability in friendship. To have them think about ways they might build friendships in class by creating structures like pair sharing, to have them get to know each other when they reflect together in various group projects, or to even have them write a thank you note to a close friend who has most shaped their character. I've had students do that in my class, and we often mail them a week later, and students get them and just are so moved by what their friends have written about them in these letters. We actually had a day yesterday that our team organized called Friendship Day, and we had a table in the quad asking friends to write notes to their friends, and we sent them to their friends either through campus mail or through regular mail. And it's a really fun way to have students think about how their friends have shaped who they are. And often these letters not only do that expression, they also build that bond even stronger. So it's a great way for us to encourage these kinds of true friendships. So those are 7 strategies that we focused on so far. I'm sure there are many others that we could talk about today. I want to end by thinking about 7 lessons we've learned about how we apply these strategies in the university context. And I'll be very quick with these. First is that these strategies are very flexible and can be used with different models of character and virtue. So you may have a different model yourself, but can use these same strategies in various ways. And also, you don't have to be an expert to use them. We can use them, you can start using them tomorrow if you'd like. They're very easy to use and often pretty compatible with what we were already doing in our classrooms. So secondly, you're already at teaching character, whether you realize it or not, even through your example. And so the question is not whether we do it, but how and to what ends we teach character. So being mindful of that for ourselves can help us be more aware and even more critical about what we're actually doing in our classrooms to educate good character. Third, you don't have to sacrifice course content to do this work well. Micro interventions can really make a big difference. So adding an assignment or a reflection to your course can actually help to reorient and reframe the course in ways that make it more character focused. And often doing less is more. You don't have to do a whole redesign to shape your course. You actually can do little things here and there to really shape the spirit of the course, and therefore help students recognize the way that character is not just something that's set aside from our lives, but actually an integral part of them. Number 4, that backwards design applies to character like it does to other areas of our teaching. You can determine your outcomes and then design activities and assignments to really help to achieve them. And often that's been very helpful for us in thinking about what we want to do in our classrooms and how to really think about these outcomes in very intentional ways. Number 5, virtue literacy, which we talked about earlier, is very valuable, but it's not sufficient. We found in our research that we must give students actual chances to apply and practice virtues for them to actually stick. Just learning about the virtues is important, but not enough to make them actually cultivate those important habits. Number 6, that creative assignments and fresh approaches using art or music or poetry or literature or history can make character education less didactic and much more engaging and more fun. So we've done a lot with arts and various sort of ways we think about character to really expand that understanding, but also really find ways to engage students in this work. One of our staff members just was certified as a Lego play expert, to use Legos as a way to think about these concepts in our program. So we do a lot of work with the theater department here, with the art department, music department, and other sort of student activity organizations to help think about this in a very capacious way. And finally, that vulnerability is what really enables transformation in the classroom, and care provides a context for growth. That's really important. We found over the last 4 years, the most important part of our work was the relationships that we have with students and they have with each other. It's those care relationships that really shape students in very meaningful ways across 4 years. And so that's really important for our work. But we can't do that work, at least fully, if we don't also have the work ourselves to actually be people of good character and build those kind of communities and relationships. So it's really hard work to do that ourselves, but I think the more we can do it ourselves as teachers, the more we can be better exemplars and supporters of our students who are engaged in that important transformation themselves. So with that, I'll conclude there, and just want to thank those people who've made this work possible, and many individual donors and also many foundations who've supported our work at Wake Forest, and just want to thank them as we conclude for making this work both possible and also so meaningful.